Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, October the 23rd. Today, Liz Truss speaks to Anne in what I genuinely think is something of a landmark interview. Her target, the Conservative blob and Kemi Badenoch. But the questions that she raises go far beyond the party she used to lead. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. And in a change from my usual morning position at the kitchen table, I've been in the US interviewing the eventful former Tory leader, and she didn't hold back on the future of her party and why she's supporting Donald Trump and Maga.
I'm not going to lie, Anne. I really did find this interview thought-provoking. Now, there's a tendency in British politics to make fun of Liz Truss. Of course there is. And I'm not saying that that's going to end immediately. And there's a big political incentive to ridicule anything she says, both in the Tory party and the Labour Party. So it's almost sort of baked into our politics that you have to do. But here's the thing. In that interview, I did find myself thinking, we're going to do quite a lot of it today. There's an awful lot of her points about the difficulty of getting things done, about the resistance to change that even Labour folk, Labour backbenchers, Labour people in government would agree with. If you just read the transcript, shut your eyes, I could hear Steve Reed saying some of the stuff that you're about to hear, along with some people in the Treasury. So I think that what you're about to hear is Liz Truss touching on many of the questions that you and I talk about in this podcast quite regularly. So today, I don my flak jacket and pose the question, is this a moment to take Liz Truss seriously again?
Well, there's a challenge. I love the idea of Steve Reed channeling Liz Truss. Thanks for that, Sam. There's also a lot going on elsewhere today. There's a by-election in the Welsh Senate seat of Caerphilly. We talked about that on Tuesday's pod. The polls will be open by the time you listen to this podcast today, and the result is expected about 2 or 3 a.m. Meanwhile, President Trump appears to have done a major pivot, announcing that he's imposing sanctions on Russian oil companies, finally using that tool in the box. After quite the seesaw this week, first he decided against sending Tomahawks to Ukraine. Then he signaled he wants President Zelensky to compromise with Russia ahead of a summit in Hungary between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So it seems as if in some ways, Sam, he's leaning closer to Russia, but then he swings back again, cancels the summit to the great relief of Kyiv, and slaps sanctions for the first time on Russia, where it can really hurt in oil and gas.
I know that Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper was talking about that to European and Western Balkan leaders yesterday at the Western Balkan Summit. They were scratching their heads and working out what to do. President Zelensky himself is actually coming to the UK on Friday for a summit with Keir Starmer. So it's still high on the agenda at the end of the week. Look, I think there's quiet satisfaction in UK diplomatic circles about where we are now latterly in the second half of the week, not least because those sanctions from Trump that he announced last night mirror the ones that the UK imposed last week. So I do think that you can genuinely say the UK led the way a bit in that. I'm usually a skeptic of Britain leads the world, but I think there is just a bit of evidence for that on this.
Jess Phillips, the Home Office Minister, is under pressure to quit as another frontrunner to run the grooming gangs inquiry withdraws. Phillips, the safeguarding minister, still has the confidence of the PM and the Home Secretary, well, at least for now. Also, there's been a lot of reaction to yesterday's podcast about instability at the top of Labour that we explored. And we were talking about whether the most senior civil servant, Chris Wormold, would be shown the door and the big 180-degree pivot in strategy, which may or may not be compatible, as Sam pointed out, with Morgan McSweeney.
My goodness, I got a lot of traffic on this in the last 24 hours. We had less serious responses, including one regular listener who called yesterday's podcast a regular reminder that the people who need the Employment Rights Bill most work in number 10. Another regular listener used to sit near Chris Wormold in the health department and said he would spend all his day with the feet on the desk, tossing a rugby ball in the air, pontificating aloud about politics. But the serious responses to yesterday's podcast, I think, fell into three categories. I got Labour members of the government absolutely clear about their anger with Chris Wormold for, in their view, not getting on with change and being a bit of a blocker. If he can't handle Operation Pegasus, that paper exercise to replicate a pandemic, then he shouldn't even be allowed to make a year in the job. He's not a safe pair of hands, they were saying. A couple of people were saying that. Secondly, there were a group of people telling me, look, They thought that Morgan McSweeney would stay even if he didn't control the narrative. They're quite happy for other figures in number 10, like Tim Allen, to own this kind of change of position over Brexit, but they don't think that that would lead to Morgan McSweeney's departure. So we will see about that. And thirdly, and this is absolutely come across a lot of conversations I had yesterday, there is so much anger being directed in private at number 10. And it's sort of almost a dangerous amount of anger. Criticisms like there aren't grown-ups, there's no contact, they don't talk to us, they don't talk to cabinet ministers, we are only allowed to speak to junior figures. There were phrases from senior figures in the government, words like internecine warfare were used by senior figures in government about the top of government. This is late era political stuff that we're hearing just 15 months into a government. And the mood that yesterday's podcast unlocked, certainly in terms of people reacting to me, is a lot worse than the general tone of the coverage suggests post-conferences.
Just a counterpoint in a minor key, Sam, to the Chris Wormold bashing, which is off the scale at the moment. It did feel a bit of displacement to me as well. Let's imagine that Wormold is bad at parts of his job, but probably not there entirely, because he's only good at throwing rugby balls in the air and complaining about politics. It almost feels to me that there's now just a target on his back because the mood is so reactive. And I'm not sure, this is really not his job or his fault, how much this pivot to blaming Brexit, unite the left, this kind of sudden shift in strategy, how that is going down with MPs. Now, it's early days, but I spoke to a couple, and they happen to be Northern MPs, and we're speaking from that perspective of the old red wall or thereabouts. And they feel that there just needs to be a sharper focus about what is happening here, why this is happening, and that the communications are swithering, as one put it, between positions. And as you say, I think that is part of the uncertainty in number 10. But at the same time, they may be uncertain, but they've set off in a completely different direction. And that combination seems to me to be the really fissile aspect.
Totally. The zigzagging leaves nobody sure where they are. Right. Let's talk about Liz Truss. Now, we're going to hear from her, quite a bit from her in a moment. But before we play you some of the clips of your interview, I just want to know a little bit of what it was like. What did you want to see here? Where did you see her? What was she like? What was her body language like? What was she like when you walked in the room? What's your relationship with her like? And you were in Magaland. Is she in her happy place? Just tell me what it felt like.
Yeah, I really set out, Sam, to explore Liz Truss in Magaland. She spends a lot of time around Donald Trump circles. And this was particularly interesting. And I learned a lot from it, not just about Liz Truss, but about the way American politics works in a particular setting. And that was this Christian conservative university in Lynchburg in Virginia. And there she was speaking at a summit, sort of business summit. One thing I had not realized is that there is quite a strong Christian conservative base in the senior business community. We sometimes think of it about being as a bit the backwaters of American politics, but really not the case. This was a university founded by Jerry Falwell, who listeners who remember the beginnings of that Christian conservative televangelism, stretching back to the 70s and beyond, and in the Reagan era will remember how important he was. This is a university he set up, and there she was speaking both to business people. There was a former CEO of Toyota, so this is not just sort of quite, oddballs. It's people who have been at the heart of American capitalism, but who have a very strong evangelical Baptist set of beliefs. There was Mike Flynn, the general who was a national security advisor to Donald Trump, ended up in very hot water over his positions over the January the 6th uprising. And there she was talking about conservatism and why she thought that the UK needed an injection of MAGA, and that without it, the Tories from Cameron on really into the Kemi Badenoch era would be doomed.
Right, let's start with what she says about the Conservative Party, but specifically Kemi herself.
I don't believe the Conservative Party has come to terms with why we were kicked out after 14 years. The answer is that the Conservative Party, rather than taking on the Blair agenda of installing, frankly, a leftist state, we accepted it. So we were playing on a left-wing playing field.
And
for our
do you
entire
think
time
that
in
Kemi
government.
Badenoch has taken that on as...
No, she hasn't. She hasn't.
Why not? I mean, she would see herself as not as...
Well, I would say because the same people who were there when I was there in office still have a lot of power within the Conservative Party. And it's the Conservative, well, they used to be called modernisers, but that sort of faction in the Conservative Party is still in control.
Okay, so Liz Truss has a target. She doesn't spell it out quite explicitly. You hear her there laying into what she calls modernisers, right? Let me just decode that. To be honest, I think I know who she is talking about. She's talking about Michael Gove and kind of allies of Michael Gove, who I think she blames for her downfall in part. Kemi has surrounded herself by a whole tranche of Gove aides running her office. And, Kemi Badenoch and Michael Gove were friends and their relationship's gone up and down a bit, but there is a link there still, I think. And so Liz Truss is putting him as the arch moderniser, effectively as king enemy in the way that she talks about the Conservative Party. And she'll expand on this without naming names in a moment.
That's a really good point. If you're looking at it in the microsphere, I think you're right. It's targeting advisors like Henry Newman, Chief of Staff, to Kemi Badenoch, anything that goes back, Sam, to the Conservative Cameron machine that she thinks has accepted the Blairite settlement. She said at one point, we've been playing on their turf. Quite some punchy metaphors there. You might think, why is she talking about this in front of a crowd of people who do not know these names? And when I arrived and talked to students on campus, a lot of them didn't know who Liz Truss was, but I think that's a fairly cheap shot. They are, after all, students in Virginia. They're in a very MAGA proto-Trump environment. They're not that interested in the weeds of British politics. And just to answer your question, because I didn't, about the mood, there she was. I think she's quite serene when she's in this environment. She looks pin sharp. She does tend to go down some rabbit holes about the Bank of England and how it's responsible for her downfall. But there's also a sort of sense that she's come with a message that conservatism needs to change, and that she finds the inspiration for that in this environment around Donald Trump, pro-business, strong values, we could come on to other aspects of the values that she's espousing there. But she does feel confident. And I think that's something, as you pointed out, it's easy when you turn people into a piñata to just say, well, they've got nothing more to say. And that wasn't the vibe at all. I think she's quite enjoying it.
I think so. Now, we're about to play a bit of her diagnosis of what's more generally wrong with the Conservative Party. Now, I haven't heard her use the phrase conservative blob before, but what you're about to hear, I thought, was a very, very clear articulation of the dividing line in today's Conservative Party. She identifies two different poles. She says one is for Rotherham and Norfolk, and the other is for Surrey, and they need to decide which side the Conservative Party is on. So just listen to this.
What has happened in British politics is exactly what's happened in American politics, which is it used to be left and right on economics. It's now, are you part of the left-wing establishment or are you against the left-wing establishment? That's the key question in politics. Are you a globalist or a nationalist? And what I was trying to do back in 2022 is shift the Conservative Party into the nationalist space. And what I faced was huge resistance from the Conservative blob, who generally represent seats in places like Surrey, who actually want to kowtow to the woke agenda. They want to be part of the kind of transgender ideology, green climate change stuff. And the problem for the Conservative Party is they still haven't chosen. They need to choose. Are they the party of Rotherham and Norfolk, or are they the party of Henley? They haven't chosen. And that's a fundamental issue. And what Nigel Farage has done is he's moved into that space. And that's an existential threat for the Conservative Party. But, we're still 4 years away from an election. I think the question is, who can develop a Trump-style agenda?
So that's her diagnosis of the problem. What did you make of it, Anne?
Yeah, she's really on the nose there, isn't she? She actually names places in the country she thinks the Conservatives should preference over others, the party of Rotherham and Norfolk, not the party of Henley, poor old Henley. But the unambiguous theme there is that you need a kind of MAGA surge, grassroots conservatism in a British way as the answer to the political conundrums and the electoral challenges of the right today. Now, a lot of people are going to recoil from that. There are lots of objections you can make, that you've got to appeal to both, etc., and who wants to be Trump light anyway. But, she thinks that this is a challenge that the Conservatives have not yet taken on. What do they really? They haven't chosen, she says. That's the problem. And at least she puts that question, do Conservatives need to be a bit clearer about what they're prepared to do to change? That retreat on green and woke from the Tories, she obviously doesn't feel enough to be convincing. She says it doesn't cut through because she would obviously go a lot further. And as much as you say you can agree or not agree with this analysis, we have seen it acknowledged in some way in the swithering, as the Northern MP put it to me, from Labour about these things. In 1 minute, it was kind of anti-green nationalist kind of language. The next, it's, let's unite the left, otherwise we might lose. And I think that is the paradox that she's putting a finger on, that neither Conservatives nor Labour have chosen clearly enough. And that, as she sees it, is why reform is the potential government.
So that was the diagnosis for the Conservative Party. Then there was the diagnosis for Britain. And this is where I do think that you can hear echoes of some of the discussions that we have, some of the challenges that I hear from people in government. We're about to play you another section. If I close my eyes, I can see Labour MPs in the Labour Growth Group, and I can see members of the government saying parts of what you're about to hear. So listen to it through that prism, because she's basically saying, Britain needs to build, and get going again, and restore its confidence. And I think quite a lot of people across the political spectrum would agree with it. Is the issue people just don't listen enough when it's her talking? Listen with that thought in mind.
The real problem in Britain is taxes too high, companies and rich people are leaving the country, regulations are too great, so you can't actually build anything in Britain. Energy costs are 4 times what they are in the US, which is killing our car industry and our steel industry. We've got too high levels of migration, which is killing our GDP per capita. It's making everybody poorer. Those are the actual real problems. And these things like Brexit, they're put out there for people who don't understand economics, who go, oh, it's Brexit. Oh, it's the mini budget. Oh, it's austerity. It's just, this is why I find that level of economic argument just so low grade. It's so low grade. We have a direct comparator here, which is the United States. So in the year 2000, British GDP per capita was almost the same as the United States. It's now the case that their income per capita is 50% higher than the British income per capita. What are the big differences between what the United States has done and what we've done for the past 25 years? One is they've fracked, so their energy prices are much, much cheaper. They're a quarter of what our energy prices are. Their taxes are lower. Their regulations are lower. Those are the key drivers of economic performance.
Who doesn't want more growth? And in some way, this is quite a mainstream argument.
Yes, it is a classic argument from the right, isn't it, in terms of she's pro-fracking. In fact, we were going to go fracking together, which I thought would have been very nice to get out and about in Pennsylvania and see what's happening there of fracking. But the government shutdown, ironically, in the US, it's not to say that everything it goes great in the US on the economic front, because that got sort of shelved because of the shutdown. But she wants fracking. She wants lower taxes. It's those bits of, if you like, the Trump agenda, which are not so much about his whole, the identity of Donald Trump and what he says, but what happens in practice to stimulate the economy. And the reason, frankly, why there are lots of fears about it, but why the markets at the moment are still kind of sticking with the Trump project. So I think you're right to say there were challenges there, and some of what she said, at least, you could imagine pro-growth, sort of green, skeptical MPs in any party saying the key drivers of economic performance, she was saying, are not in the right place. And if it weren't, if you say, associated with Liz Truss, because that mini budget, of course, and its effects and her demise as leaders still hangs around her neck. What she's really saying is you can't ignore the fact that we have not yet got a recipe for growth in the UK. So I'm giving you one, and now let's talk about it. I wonder whether it is going to be the direction of travel for the Tories. Interesting, the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride might like to have a listen to that, because when you take out the personal attacks, it is at least a potential recipe for the Conservatives on the economy.
It's the end of the week, and I actually want to finish on another listener contribution who wrote into me yesterday after the podcast about the state of modern Britain. Now, he just poses a series of questions, which I want you to read out, and then I will answer. So off you go, Anne.
The year is 2027 in Keir Starmer's Britain. You go to get your morning coffee. Who's behind the counter and who hands you your latte, Sam?
It's Louise Casey, Anne.
And you get on the bus to the office. Who's driving?
Louise Casey.
You go to nod to people at the front desk. Who are they all?
They're all Louise Casey.
Has Labour got a replacement for Sadiq Khan in 2028?
Louise Casey.
The next doctor?
Louise Casey.
And who's taking over from Melvyn Bragg on In Our Time?
Well, it's Louise Casey, of course. I'd like to thank David for all of that. She seems to be the answer to everything. One whisper that she wouldn't want to be Cabinet Secretary reached me yesterday, but we will see. Certainly, it doesn't seem like she'll be doing the social care inquiry anytime soon, as more responsibilities were heaped on her head. Anyway, British State loves Louise Casey, and we love our time limit. So actually, at this point, I'm going to draw us to a close. Thank you for quite the week, and it's been a lot of fun, and we will see you on Monday.
See you next week.